Well, folks, this next story should be a much bigger story than it is. When I heard this news, I said, holy crap. For all the things that we see happening out in the open with the Trump administration, the one thing you have to ask yourself is if we're seeing all of this out in the open, what's happening behind closed doors and what's being covered up behind closed doors that we have no idea about. This story came out. It should be getting more attention. So I'm going to be going over and reading this one to you now from the New York Times. I have never had a good feeling about Trump's border czar, Tom Homan. There's something about that dude. He just comes off to me like a guy that would be in a Goodfellas movie or like the bad guy on a crime show, that when he comes on to the show, that's the moment you're like, oh, that guy again. That's what he reminds me of. And when I heard this story, I said, holy crap, this is like Spiro Agnew all over again. And so he was Nixon's vice president. I highly recommend, if you've never listened to Bag Man by Rachel Maddow, go out of your way to find that podcast, because it truly is like almost prophetic as to what's going on today. She really did a great job on that podcast. And if you go back and listen to it, you'll kind of realize that Spiro Agnew, Nixon's vice president, was kind of like the godfather of MAGA in a whole lot of ways. A lot of people think it was Nixon, but Agnew was something else. But we're going to be reading this article here from the New York Times, who recently Trump's lawsuit was dismissed, and we hope it stays that way. But Trump's Justice Department closed an investigation into Tom Homan for accepting bag of cash. Mr. Homan came under scrutiny after he was said to be recorded last year making $50,000 in cash, taking $50,000 in cash from undercover FBI agents. Folks, the mainstream media is failing us miserably, because I'm sure they'll just gloss over stuff like this. But in any other era, this should be the mainstream breaking story on every channel. So, Tom Homan, who was later named Donald Trump's border czar, was recorded in September of 2024, accepting a bag with $50,000 in cash in an undercover FBI investigation, according to people familiar with the case, which was later shut down by Trump administration officials. The cash payment, which was made inside a bag from the food chain Cava, I guess they say that, grew out of a long-running counterintelligence investigation that had not been targeting Mr. Homan, according to the people who spoke on the condition to describe the case. Mr. Homan's encounter with the undercover agents, recorded on audio tape, led him to being investigated for potential bribery and other crimes after he apparently took the money and agreed to help the agents, who were posing as businessmen, secure government contracts related to border security, the people said. After Trump took office this year, Justice Department officials shut down the case because of doubts about whether prosecutors could prove to a jury that Homan had agreed to do any specific acts in exchange for the money, and because he had not held an official government position at the time of the meeting with the undercover agents, the people added. One familiar person with the case said the evidence gathered had not met all the necessary elements of relevant federal crimes, while another contended that the case was effectively ended prematurely before such additional evidence could be gathered. Justice Department officials ultimately decided that the evidence against Homan was insufficient to support charges of wire fraud, bribery, or conspiracy, the people said. Emil Bove III, a former Justice Department official and one-time personal attorney for Donald Trump, who's now a federal appeals court judge, expressed skepticism about the case as early as February, one person said. The existence of the investigation was reported earlier by MSNBC. Now, it remains unclear whether the investigation into Homan would have been dropped regardless of which party controlled the White House, given recent Supreme Court rulings, a high bar for what constitutes a bribe or other corrupt act. But the revelation about the inquiry and decision to shut it down comes amid broader fights over degree of control Trump holds over how the Justice Department handles criminal cases, particularly those related to perceived enemies. The episode raises questions about whether the administration has sought to shield one of its own officials from legal consequences. Well, it absolutely does raise that question. And we have seen them try to dodge legal consequences for years. So there's no shocker there. And whether Homan's actions were considered by the White House when he was appointed to his government role. Kash Patel, the FBI director, and Todd Blanche, the deputy attorney general, said in a statement Saturday that the investigation was subjected to full review by FBI agents and the Justice Department prosecutors. They found no credible evidence of any criminal wrongdoing. That's coming from Kash Patel, who used to be a podcaster, who said that the reason they were holding back the Epstein files is because of who was on the list, and now he's holding back the Epstein files because of who's on the list. Just wanted to throw that out there. They added that the Justice Department must remain focused on real threats to the American people, not baseless investigations. As the result, the investigation has been closed. Abigail Jackson, a White House spokeswoman, called the Homan case a blatantly political investigation. Aren't they always call that, no matter what happens? Again, will there ever be a time where we have an investigation and they say, oh yeah, you got us? It's always going to be them accusing a political hit job. It's always going to be them blaming the radical left. How the hell will we ever get past any of this? And she's also said that it showed that the Biden administration was using its resources to target Trump's allies rather than investigate real criminals and millions of illegal aliens who flooded our country. Ms. Jackson added that Homan had not been involved with any contract award decisions, calling him a lifelong public servant who's doing a phenomenal job on behalf of Donald Trump and the country. Homan did not respond for requests for comment. He told the New York Times earlier this year he would not get involved with specific contract decisions. In the first Trump administration, Homan served as the acting head of ICE, and after leaving government, he emerged as a vocal critic of the Biden administration's policies in his role as a paid contributor on Fox News. He founded an organization called Border 9/11 Foundation, whose mission was to educate Americans on what it means to have secure, well-managed border and why it matters. He also opened a consulting business that had worked for companies seeking immigration-related contracts, including those poised to benefit from Trump's policies, the Times reported in January. At one point, he was paid between $100,000 and $150,000 to lobby in Texas for Fisher Industries, a construction firm that was last secured a $225 million contract with the state to build a section of the border wall. Homan made it clear that he planned to rejoin Trump if in government if he were to be reelected. I promised Donald Trump, he announced, that if he goes back, I will go back, he wrote in November of 2023, and I'm going to run the biggest deportation operation this country has ever seen. He was drawn into the FBI case after a target of investigation suggested in 2023 on his own initiative that paid $1 million payment to Homan could lead to lucrative federal contracts to border security work, according to people familiar with the matter. I'll go ahead and stop the article right there. But again, I'll just kind of end where I started. For everything that we're seeing happening in the mainstream news, the things that makes it to our ears that we actually hear about, those are one thing. But folks, how much stuff is happening behind closed doors? Hate to pull the whataboutisms, but we know for a fact that if this was anyone in any way, shape, or form who was on audio taking a bribe, either way, slice it as taking a bribe, regardless. But if they were caught that way, MAGA would be exploding right now with calls for that person to be removed and calls for the Democratic president to be impeached. But folks, this is getting to where this is all just business as usual for them. This is just what they're doing. This is just what they're going for. They're not holding back. They don't give a shit. And we truly do just have to continue to cover these stories, bring them out, bring them to people's attention. I appreciate everyone that listens to me here on the channel. I've had a lot of people say, Brando, I want to speak up. I can't speak out, but I can't start a YouTube channel, or I don't, want to start a YouTube channel or a podcast. You don't have to. And I understand that when you're at work, a lot of times you have to keep your mouth shut to keep your job. I totally get that. But I know that you do have reasonable people in your life, or you have people in your life that, I think everybody deep down has a voice of reason. I think we all do. And so you can pass around stories to people you're talking with. You can share the links. You can share the videos. You can get the conversation started. And if enough people will start the conversation that way, then more people will be able to bring it into the mainstream and talk about it. That's one thing that I would recommend, and one thing that I always say is, if nothing else, just share this video with someone and say, hey, did you hear about this story? And I would encourage anyone to go read these stories for themselves. I'm just a guy sitting here reacting to the news, and that's what I'm always going to tell you. I'm going to be truthful about it. I'm not a legal expert. I'm not a lawyer. I listen to legal experts and lawyers to form an opinion. I listen to doctors and scientists to form, to become educated. I started to say to form an opinion, but I don't believe that. I believe if someone gives you a scientific fact, you don't necessarily have an opinion on that. And I think we've lost sight of that in a lot of our discussion. We've allowed people into the platform and onto the national stage that aren't bringing real debates. And if you're dealing in facts and someone's over here, there's no debate to be had over 2 + 2 = 4. There's no debate there. And also, I would like to point this out. Muhammad Ali, I consider him to be the greatest boxer of all time. And he fought the greatest boxers of his era. And that's what everyone does, no matter what sport they play. They play the best that their era has to offer. So Muhammad Ali, knocked out a whole lot of people. He fought the best. But if someone had have showed up at one of his fights and said, hey, I'm a rooster. I fight roosters in Harlan, Kentucky, and I want to get in there and I want to fight Muhammad Ali, they'd have said, dude, you fight roosters, okay? You're not a boxer. You don't belong on this stage, because that's not what we're doing here. What you're doing is inhumane. What you're doing is disgusting. And just because you stand back and watch a roosters fight does not mean that you should be allowed to get in the ring with Muhammad Ali. That's how I look at it. When people says to me, why ain't you had that guy on your podcast? The same reason why Muhammad Ali wouldn't fight a man who fought roosters. That's why. That's the simplest way that I can point it out to you. I know that may be one of the most ridiculous analogies I've ever made, one of the most over-the-top ones I've ever made, but I learned that from Uncle Brad. He used to make like some of the most extreme analogies I have ever heard that sometimes would have me gut laughing. I would be gut laughing at his analogies, like, God, that's freaking funny, but it was true. And remember that the next time someone says, why don't you talk to that guy? Well, if that guy's over there saying 2 + 2 = 78, don't waste your time. Okay? Tell him 2 + 2 = 4. Show him how 2 + 2 = 4. And if he sticks both fingers in his ears and screams, la, 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 walk away from it. Don't sit there and engage in it any longer. You're not doing yourself or anyone any favors. That's just my take. But again, if all the stuff is happening out of the open, how many more stories like this Tom Homan story has been shut down before it even made it to our ears?